Remember when individual citizens' bank accounts were frozen, their credit cards were frozen, and they were generally targeted by the government of the day for their beliefs and making donations? No, that didn't happen in some third world country or some banana republic. It was here in Canada during the invocation of the Emergencies Act by the Trudeau Liberals. I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Jamil Jivani. So, Jamil, recent court documents, the Toronto Star just reported on it. Court documents have shown that when Justin Trudeau decided to invoke the Emergencies Act, he, basically proving all of us right, acted far too hastily and that a deal was on the table. So, what do we know?
Well, what we know is that Justin Trudeau was not interested in negotiating with the trucker convoy. He didn't want them to surrender. He didn't want some kind of settlement. He wanted to make a point. And I think this reveals something about his character. Because Justin Trudeau is the son of a former prime minister, he worked as a drama teacher, he has a nice head of hair, he calls himself a feminist. People think that he's a nice guy, but he really isn't. I mean, he's a pretty ruthless dude. And he clearly wanted to inflict punishment on his political opponents. He wanted to use the greatest power that he could come up with, which was the Emergencies Act, to really crush people and to make a point by freezing bank accounts and taking away rights and having police come in and be put into a situation of conflict with protesters. He really wanted to use the biggest hammer, the biggest weapon that he had at his disposal. And I do think that's revealing of his character. And I do hope that in some ways, as we remember what happened with the trucker convoy, and you remember how Prime Minister Trudeau responded, that this becomes part of how we tell the story of what kind of man he is.
As many years as we've been covering Justin Trudeau, we've always talked about the notion that, he's unserious. I mean, you take your pick. The costume changes, the trips, the blackface, whatever, pick your scenario. But I think Jamil sort of touches on an important point of the character of the type of prime minister this is. For all the show and the bluster and the sunny ways, at the heart of it all, he's really just using the tools of government, which he's in charge of, to quiet what are perceived as his political enemies.
Well, and also to bolster his political fortunes, because Justin Trudeau knew that the trucker convoy was not popular with the majority of Canada. Now, I know convoy supporters don't believe that, and they don't believe any poll, and everyone loved us. No, not a single poll showed that. And that's part of why Justin Trudeau, he could have had an unconditional surrender offer on the table. He was going to invoke the Emergencies Act, which he did not need. All that was needed to clear the convoy was proper, effective policing, which we got once Peter Slowly was fired as the chief of police in Ottawa. And, Steve Bell came in and did what cops have always done. Hey, you can't stay here on the road indefinitely. That's what was needed. But Trudeau wanted to show that he was acting tough. He saw that his voting coalition base really didn't like it. Yes, some, but not all conservatives did support the convoy, but his voting coalition base really didn't like it. And they would not have been happy if he negotiated anything with them. They wouldn't have been negotiated if he said hello to them on the street. They just wanted punishment, kind of like, vaccine mandates, everything else. I don't care what the truth is, just punish people. I want to punish people I don't like. That has been such a big part of the narrative. I'm glad that that's slowly fading away as the pandemic fades away, but Trudeau was never interested in a negotiated settlement. We can find out whatever Jody Thomas, the national security advisor, had to tell cabinet, or what the public safety minister, Marco, the police told me to do it, Mendocino has to say. At the end of the day, Trudeau wanted a fight. He got one.
Jamil, do you think Canadians really genuinely appreciate the gravity of when the Emergencies Act was invoked? The bank accounts. I know some of the polls showed that may not necessarily support the convoy and the protest and sort of their whatever it is that they were pushing against, but certainly it did leave a very bad taste in Canadians' mouths when their fellow citizens' bank accounts were being frozen. I mean, the hand of government was literally going in to your private resources. It's pretty scary stuff. And I don't think that Canadians really liked that. Does this information that we now have, these court documents, a lot of civil liberties groups fighting against the invoking of the Emergency Act, Does any of that get exposed? Does any of that, sort of reveal anything further what Canadians should know about how much of an overreach this was?
It's a really good question, and it's one I'm not sure we have the answer to yet. I mean, part of it's going to be how we tell the story moving forward, how history is written about what happened with the trucker convoy. The best-selling book in the country right now is Andrew Lawton's book on the Freedom Convoy. And I think that's an example of where Canadians are clearly interested in wanting to know what happened. And there is a historical record being created right now in real time about what occurred. So if we're insistent on telling the truth about what happened in Ottawa during those weeks, I do think that more Canadians will remember this as an example of government overreach. If you go to the museum in Ottawa right now, there is an exhibit on the War Measures Act that became the Emergencies Act. And you see the examples of when it was invoked in the past: World War I, World War II, a terrorist attack in Quebec. Like, these are examples that are very extreme. And when you put the trucker convoy in that historical lineage, it looks like a massive overreaction from Prime Minister Trudeau. And that's one of the reasons why I think he felt the need to do what he's done in terms of misrepresenting the trucker convoy, treating people who supported it, even a single mom who's a waitress making minimum wage out in British Columbia, freezing her bank account. Like, he's trying as best as he can to make his reaction look like it was justifiable. And I just think that if we tell the truth long enough, he won't be able to get away with it.
And Brian, I'm going to go back even further, because this invoking the Emergencies Act, this direct targeting of Canadian citizens for choosing to volunteer their own dollars to this organization, goes back even further. The precipitation for all of this, of course, in part, were those vaccine mandates, where you have been reporting on information submitted into court that the vaccine mandates, well, there was really no rationale or justification for those. What did you learn?
Well, despite what Press Progress, the media wing of the NDP, or some talk radio hosts will tell you, this is sworn testimony in a lawsuit from top officials at the Public Health Agency of Canada, who, including the woman who authorized the use of the COVID-19 vaccines, not consulted on whether vaccine mandates were needed. Others were asked, were studies done on whether traveling by air would lead to greater transmission on the plane. Now, we know that travel absolutely brings COVID into an area, but having an unvaccinated person on the plane, are they more likely to spread it? And the answer was no. 1 in 1.7 million chance, according to a study that's still on PHAC's website. All of this entered into evidence in court that showed that there was no scientific basis for it. It was politics. And if you remember, in the days leading up to the election, Trudeau had been adamant. He called vaccine mandates something we don't do in this country. He called them divisive. He said that he would not bring one in time and again. And yet when the polling came in that showed, as I said, some Canadians wanted to punish people who had a different view than them. And I say this as someone who has been fully vaccinated, but I believe in bodily autonomy. I believe in our natural rights. When Trudeau saw the polling, he decided, I'm going into an election. I can use this as a wedge issue. And what did he campaign on all through the election? In addition to abortion and guns and the usual liberal things, he went after suburban mothers and said, if you don't vote for us, those conservatives are going to make you and your family sick from COVID. And these vaccine mandates will protect you. He knew exactly what he was doing. It was done for politics, not for medical or scientific reasons. And it was done because people wanted to punish those who disagreed with them.
And Jamil, it one more sort of exposure of this not so touchy-feely Justin Trudeau, because if you recall, the language that was being used against those that, sure, you can believe in getting yourself vaccinated, but ordering and putting that edict upon your fellow citizens, you don't have to believe in that. You can push back against that. Trudeau called them racist. He called them bigots. He might as well have called them white supremacists. In fact, I think he may have alluded to that at some point, purely because a citizen didn't agree with his government mandate and issue and orders. And now, once again, we have one more sort of exposure of some of these overreaches. So, does this? I'm going to pivot this a bit, because these are the sorts of things that, if there is an election coming soon, they're going to throw all this stuff at the feet of, let's say, Pierre Poilievre, who may be the next conservative leader, or Jean Charest, whoever. The next conservative leader is going to have to, sort of answer for some of this, fairly or not. How do you see it?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that I don't know how much Trudeau has ever cared about facts. I mean, it really has always been motivated by political power, by punishing his enemies. The example you gave about the vaccine mandates is very clear. Based on all objective information, we know that if you are Black, if you are Indigenous, if you are working class in this country, you are less likely to be vaccinated. So the idea that caring about vaccine mandates has anything to do with white supremacy is insane. And yet he will make that argument for the sake of ignoring facts and emphasizing what he thinks is helpful for his own political ambitions. And I think that whoever the next leader of the Conservative Party is, whether it's Pierre Poilievre, whether John Charest, Leslyn Lewis, has to come in knowing, don't play this game. Don't accept the Liberals' framing on every issue and feel the need to be defensive and prove you're not what they say they are, because they don't even believe what they're saying about you. It's not about facts. It's disingenuous.
The problem is, Jamil, that whoever the next conservative leader is, if Trudeau does this, they will have to answer to that narrative, because the media will put it to them every single day on the campaign trail, because they don't believe what you just said, that you're less likely to be vaccinated if you are Black, Indigenous, working class, or if they do, it'll be at the bottom of a story after they've repeated everything the Prime Minister said.
That's true.
And so the Conservative leader has to answer for it. And then when they don't, you just have TV news hit after TV news hit. Well, they won't answer the question. It's a vicious circle. It's a vicious cycle. I don't know what the answer is after watching this happen for 20 years.
Pierre Poilievre has done a good job so far rejecting some of the framing that has been imposed on him, even when they've tried to call him a racist at this point. Yeah. And it's not about evading questions. I think it's more so about saying, I'm going to answer this based on what I believe is true, rather than answer it based on what you're telling me is true.
Yeah, I think he seems to be the only one that has the skill right now amongst the contenders that are out there to articulate it very plainly without getting tripped up. Well, there are going to be far more questions and very few answers from the Trudeau government in the coming days as these court documents continue to reveal more information. Log on to Facebook and Twitter, let us know what you think, and log on to torontosun.com and subscribe to support this great journalism that we're doing, trying to hold the Trudeau government accountable.